This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. A mad scramble for high-profile victories with the first 100-day mark looming as the president proposes a major tax break for the wealthiest Americans. We're going to begin with this breaking news, a record, but one this president probably doesn't like holding. A new CNN ORC poll showing Donald Trump has the lowest approval rating of any newly elected president in recent history. Let's get right to our experts now. CNN political analyst Abby Phillip, CNN contributor David Fahrenthold, senior political analyst David Gergen, and contributor J.D. Vance, the author of Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis. J.D., you first. Good evening, by the way, to all of you. Not good news for the president. Our latest CNN ORC poll shows the president having a dismal approval rating right now, just 44%, meaning he's at the bottom compared to other presidents around this time. Is this why we're seeing the White House scramble for a win with less than 100 hours to go to 100 days?
Well, it's obviously not good news for the president.
Not only scrambling for...
It's J.D.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Well, like you said, Don, it's definitely not good news for the president so far. And I don't know if I describe them as scrambling for a win, but fundamentally, the problem with the president's approval ratings is that it does not give him any sort of solid base from which to govern. So you talk about a tax cut plan, you talk about reforming health care. To do that successfully, you have to negotiate from a position of strength, and it's hard to do that when you're at a 44 or 45% approval rating.
Yeah, David, since you're raring to go, the next question is for you. This poll shows that 56% of Americans think the president has done a poor job of assembling a team of top advisors. 52% think he hasn't done a good job keeping campaign promises. If the president isn't keeping his promises, what's that say? Is that a deal? Is he a deal maker in chief, or is he the deal maker he promised out on the campaign trail?
Well, first of all, Don, he has been slow on making appointments, and department after department has a very thin team. It's been very hard for them to govern with that. And it's also true he's not been able to keep a lot of his promises. This mad scramble right here in the last days, I think, has two purposes. One, they want to see if they can get a couple of points on the board that were unexpected. And secondly, I think they're trying to override the coverage of the 100-day mark. They would much rather have us talking about the boldness of his tax cut and will it really work than talking about look how thin the record is after 100 days compared to, say, an FDR who got 15 major bills passed. How many have we got here in this administration? Zero. Yeah. So I think they'd like to change the subject.
Yeah. Listen, Abby, this current president likes to compare himself to the former president, but looks like I'm going to put them. I'm going to read them for you, and I'll read them in order. Kennedy in 1961 had 78% approval. Eisenhower in 1953, 73. Obama 63. Carter 63. Bush 62. Nixon 61. 58 for Bush in 1989, Clinton 55, and then Trump now at 44%. He's 11 points behind Bill Clinton. And so how's that for comparisons?
Yeah, there's supposed to be a honeymoon here, and it's not just because the newly elected president, is someone who's fresh in voters' minds. They're giving them the benefit of the doubt. It's really critical. It's a foundation to govern. It's the sort of the high water mark that he can sail down from, and Trump is really starting from a position of weakness right now, and the White House is struggling with this, partly because it would be one thing if Trump were going to put his head down and just focus and move forward on his agenda, but this is a president who really likes to win, and the coverage this week was something that they knew going into it was going to be very daunting, partly because it would sort of agitate his instinct to want to be on top and to counterbalance negative coverage. So there was definitely a lot of anxiety going into this week, partly because Trump just he doesn't accept the concept of failure or the concept of not living up to his promises, and whether he feels like he has or not. That was something that he intended this week to go into, insisting that he had been much more successful than his critics would like to say about him.
David Fahrenthold, there is something that the president did do a good job of doing, and that's holding on to his base. And Republicans, 85% approve of the job he's doing. Independents, so 44%. Democrats, 8% approve. So that's not good news if he's trying to expand his base, but at least he's keeping his base, David Fahrenthold.
That's true. And I think one of the things that has been notable about the first 100 days is that he hasn't actually changed that much in the lives of his supporters. For them, a lot of what he's doing is what he was doing on the campaign trail. He's taking the fight to people they don't like, to people they think are arrogant or they don't support. He's sort of, their champion in these sort of rhetorical battles, but there's not actually any policy consequences. I think that might change if, for instance, he was able to get this American Health Care Act, the current version of the Obamacare repeal bill, if he was able to get that passed. There's some things he's proposed that if he actually had been able to do them, the big budget cuts, that might have had a real impact on his voters' lives. At this point, though, not much has changed in their lives, and they're still seeing him sort of represent them against their enemies.
David Gergen, it seems like there is a mad rush to get everything in, announcing tax proposals today. There's talk of withdrawing from NAFTA, briefings on North Korea, trying to get a deal with health care, all while avoiding the government shutdown. Why is this all happening now? And as I said at the top of the show, his first 100 days has really come down to really the last 100 hours. Why all now?
Well, I think he's been cracking the whip inside and urging people forward because he knows that this week, especially toward the end of the week, Saturday night, could be a mess for him. It could be one of his worst weeks in coverage. And if he can invent other stories, which he is doing, you have to say he's pretty darn good at creating diversions, or changing the conversation, let us put it more charitably and perhaps more fairly. He's very good at having us talk about other things. Our news, we would have been devoting this hour after hour right now to the first 100 days and why they've turned out, in a disappointing fashion for everyone but his base. But now we're talking about other things. It's mixed it in. I think he may come to rue the way he's rushed into this and rushing these proposals in front of him, because these things, take the health care plan. There's some talk about voting on Friday. This hasn't been scored by the Congressional Budget Office. We don't know if there are 24 million or even more people who may not have insurance a few years from now if they pass this bill. We don't know anything about the scoring on the tax, and we're talking, about a tax plan we've never seen. We don't have a plan. We have some suggestions of things, a loose group of things that they're calling the big.
I have it. It's like one page of what he plans to do. So it's like an outline that you would sort of hand in for college. Yeah. This is what my term paper is going to be about. And Abby, I want to ask you about that because the White House unveiled this tax plan today. Slash individual tax rates, simplify the tax code from 7 to 3 brackets. He also wants to cut the tax rate to 15% for all businesses. The White House handed out the one-page sheet that I showed you. One page, light on details. And one senior GOP aide said that it's not even close to tax reform. The question is, listen, everyone knows the tax code needs some reformation, needs to be reformed, but is all this sort of a drive to get something accomplished within this first 100-day mark?
Well, it's important to note that it is not tax reform, and this is something that's really important. I'm told that over the last week there's been a debate about whether the strategy ought to be pursue reform or pursue just cutting rates. It's pretty clear when you look at this plan that where they ended up was a plan that the vast majority of it is just cutting rates, cutting the effective tax rate for low and middle income people, but especially for high income people and corporations. And that is reflective of a desire among the president to just keep things as simple as possible. He doesn't like things like the border adjustment tax, which congressional Republicans really wanted because he felt like it was very complicated. There were too many steps in the process. The problem for him going forward here is that this is not a foundation from which a lot of Republicans want to work from, in part because it's not paid for. It doesn't deal with the underlying problems with the tax code, and it might create bigger problems for them going down the road. So this is an opening gambit for a president who is sort of like outside of the traditional Washington system. But at some point, he's going to have to get back into the system and work with his own party to get something that is actually doable, that addresses what they promised their voters going into their re-election bids in 2018.
I think with two words, important words that you said, Abby, were paid for, David Fahrenthold, because anytime taxes come up, the question typically follows is how's it going to help President Trump? And will we ever see his tax returns? Secretary Steve Mnuchin responded to that.
Will the president release his tax returns so that The president has no intention. The president has released plenty of information and I think has given more financial disclosure than anybody else. I think the American population has plenty of information.
David Fahrenthold, can you give us a reality check on that? Do you agree that he, an assessment that his assessment of the president has given more financial disclosure than anybody else?
Well, that's untrue. It's not relative to other presidents. The past number of presidents going back to the 70s have released their tax returns for precisely this reason. They felt like it was hard to make any sort of decision or proposal about how people's taxes ought to be changed without letting people see how it would affect them. And we know from the little glimpses we've gotten of Donald Trump's tax returns, for instance, this 2005 tax return that was surfaced recently, that some of these proposals would be a huge benefit for him. So I think it matters that he's not willing to put that out there. Trump has been very lucky in his opponents so far, but he's really handing his Democratic opponents, as in disarray as they are, a real sword to come after him with now if he's going to ask people to cut taxes for the rich and not show how he might benefit.
JD, here's what President Trump is saying today about his first 100 days.
Sometimes I look at some of the things I'm signing, I say, maybe people won't like it, but I'm doing the right thing. And no regular politician's going to do. I don't know if you folks would do. I will tell you, literally, some politicians have said, you're doing the right thing. I don't know if I would have had the courage to do some of these things, but we're doing them because it's the right thing to do.
JD, is he right? Because our new poll shows 52% of Americans see the president's approach to the presidency as an unnecessary risk. 47% say it's a necessary shakeup. What do you think?
Well, he's fundamentally arguing that he's being unconventional, and obviously it sounds like a fair number of voters actually agree with that. The thing about those risks is it really matters what consequence they eventually have. And I think that we're at this stage right now where Trump can argue persuasively that he's been an unconventional president, but that has to lead somewhere. If it leads to a tax reform proposal that fundamentally hurts his own voters, if it leads to a health care reform proposal that starts to hurt his own voters or hurt the country at large, then that's not going to mean anything that he's being unconventional. You could be unconventionally right or unconventionally wrong, and I think it's just way too early to tell. But fundamentally, the conversation has to turn to, is Donald Trump making the lives of a majority of Americans better, or is he enabling them to make their own lives better? And right now it's too early to say, but the core domestic policy priorities, the core domestic policy proposals that he's put out there, even though they are obviously not very detailed, to the degree that there are details, it's not looking especially good right now. And I say that, of course, as a conservative who really wants this president to succeed in certain ways, but I just don't see the evidence that we're being serious about the policies that are necessary to move the country forward yet.
Great conversation. Thank you all. Have a good evening. When we come back, more on how the president's tax plan would help the wealthiest Americans, including those named Trump.